Salam alaikum, everyone. My name is Alina Hussain. I am an attorney practicing civil rights and immigration for the Council for American Islamic Relations in Florida, so CAIR Florida. We're joined by a set of panelists here today to discuss a pertinent and unprecedented topic of just the revocation of visas and sort of advice that we can offer if individuals are approached by ICE. So I'm going to go ahead and have our attorneys here introduce themselves, give a little bit of background, and then we can get into the substance of the talk today. So Zen, I don't know if you wanted to get us started.
Sure. Salam, everyone. My name is Zain Abadi. I practice immigration, mostly business and investor immigration, but we dabble in some other areas of immigration. I've been practicing for about 6+ years now. And we handle a pretty wide variety of issues from compliance to immigration diligence on transactions, and also dealing with these F1 student issues that have popped up in the last couple of weeks.
Thank you. Khurram, did you want to?
Yeah, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thanks for having me. My name is Khurram Wahed. I'm with the firm of Wahed, Biscayne and Geller in Miami. I practice criminal defense, federal, state, and also do a lot of civil rights and civil litigation work, a lot of it related to law enforcement encounters.
Perfect. And Jay?
Salam, everyone. Thank you for having me. I am an attorney here out of Miami. I'm a real estate attorney primarily, and I'm a civil rights attorney by night. My background includes being a prosecutor for several years, and I was also the general counsel of the bank for a while. And I'm here to provide any assistance I can.
And last but not least, Bob?
I'm Bob Sickton. I'm an immigration lawyer with CAIR Florida. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I've been around a while, done a lot of different things, been a corporate 500 lawyer, a bunch of other stuff. Now I do immigration.
Perfect. I think that's all of us. So thanks so much to SOFL Muslims for actually organizing this. This was, I think it's a very necessary topic nowadays. So just as a preliminary sort of introductory matter, could maybe Zen, I think you might be best suited for this. Could you give us an idea as to what exactly it is we're seeing with respect to the revocation of the visas?
Sure. And so, I think the media's kind of conflated two separate issues as just one general, revocation of student visa issue. But there's really two different issues I'm seeing here. Issue number one is the issuance or is the revocation of the visa itself, right? So a visa doesn't necessarily give you status in the United States. It just gives you the ability to travel in and out of the United States, right? So in your passport, you'll have an F1 visa stamp with an expiration date. You likely got it at a consulate or embassy abroad. And so with that, we're seeing Department of State, which is the one that handles visa issuance, revoke those visas retroactively. So, well after the interviews have taken place. And while, generally from the cases I've seen, while the individual's been in the United States for some time. The other issue is the CVIS record, which, those of you that are international students, you have a CVIS record on your I-20, which is the form that gives you status in the United States. Your designated school officer, and every school should have a designated school officer that interacts or liaises with immigration authorities and issues the I-20s. We're seeing them essentially email the students or call them and tell them that ICE has revoked their CVIS record without explanation. And so both of these problems warrant different approaches, and we can get into that. So on the visa side, right? Department of State has a pretty wide latitude to revoke visas that's issued. And so what I'd recommend, if you get an email saying that your student visa has been revoked from the Department of State, number one, check with your designated school officer, make sure your CVIS record is still valid, because I haven't seen CVIS records uniformly revoked after the visa has been revoked. And what that means, if it's not revoked, then you can stay in the United States and you're not required, you're not required to leave the United States. It just means you shouldn't travel outside the United States because your travel document is no longer valid. And then the second step is, I would consult at least with an immigration attorney or take a look at the reasoning behind the visa revocation. Sometimes, Department of State will put some kind of vague reasoning in those emails. And work with them so that next time you travel, if travel is recommended, because a lot of the times I'm recommending people just stay put, to get a new visa at a consular post abroad. The other issue is the CVIS revocations. And essentially here you have four options. Option number one, you leave the United States because you've lost, you've essentially lost your right or your ability to stay in the United States. You have no status if your CVIS record is terminated, right? I don't recommend that option, right? It's just going to be very hard to get back in. Option number two, you change to another status, and there's issues with that. We can get into that a little bit later, but, in terms of filing a change of status from an F1 to maybe a B visa or another type of visa, likely that case is going to undergo increased scrutiny, number one. And number two, the government might take the position that you have no status to change from because your CVIS record was terminated. And so, if I'm ranking options from least favorable to most favorable, that'd be the second least favorable. The third, someone asked if I could spell CVIS record, SEVIS, it's an acronym. So CVIS. The third least favorable or second most favorable option would be to apply for reinstatement of F1 status. And essentially you have 5 months from the termination of your F1 status and your CVIS record to apply for reinstatement. Now, the issue with this, and from what I'm seeing, I haven't seen it personally with my own clients, but when talking with other immigration attorneys, is that ICE is essentially, revoking those new CVIS records once they're issued. Because as part of the reinstatement process, you need a new I-20 issued by your university, by the designated school officer at university. And ICE is tending to revoke those as well. And then the fourth and most favorable option is to litigate. Not always the most cost-effective option, but I think there's solid legal grounds to stand on here, especially if ICE has terminated your CVIS record without reason, and litigation might be the only way to remedy that.
Thank you for that background. So specifically with respect to the South Florida community and Florida more broadly, are we seeing either of these two situations happening with increasing frequency in your experience, or is this something that folks should just be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, and I don't know if anyone else can speak on this, but before the last 2 weeks, prior to the last 2 weeks, I've seen some visa revocations. It's pretty rare. But in terms of just CVIS revocations with no reason, this is, we're in uncharted territory, right? So we're also kind of figuring out how to deal with this. And there's just been a lot of discussion on the immigration lawyer forums and Facebook pages, and, with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, AILA, which is a pretty big national organization of immigration attorneys. And I think, it's consensus now that probably the best way to fix this is to litigate this in federal court, to remedy this, because it's likely illegal and not allowed.
Okay, great. And then, so just kind of going to that first option that you had mentioned of folks opting themselves to leave the country because they feel they're no longer in status. Could you speak to that a little bit? Perhaps Khurram, if you could speak to that a little bit. Folks voluntarily opting to leave when they feel they no longer have status because of these revocations.
Sure. So there's, like Van said, so you've got two different issues happening. One is we're talking about the travel visa now, right? So if that is revoked and you're still in the country, you're okay unless enforcement comes to remove you, and then they need some grounds, right? Usually those grounds are criminal. They got to have some criminal grounds or some violation of your status in some other way. And you have the ability to challenge that. The other situation though is you're going to say, okay, well, you can voluntarily deport. And folks are getting information through email saying voluntarily deport by a certain day. If you do leave, as Zane just said, you don't have a travel document to come back in. And that's the government trying to really not deal with the second part of the problem, which is they need some grounds. Once they revoke your travel visa, they need some grounds to actually terminate your current status in the country. Okay. There's process to do that, and I think they're just trying to avoid doing that by asking people to voluntarily deport themselves. Now, the other thing to know though is if you say I'm not going to voluntarily deport, and the enforcement folks come and say we're going to pick you up, what do you do, right? So 3 things. One is, just like everybody else in the United States, you have a right not to talk to law enforcement, even ICE. So you just should not say anything. Obviously, if you think it might be happening, try and prepare ahead of time. Make sure somebody knows what's going on with you and you're checking in. If you have counsel, make sure that they're aware of where you are. Take some proactive steps if you can. Two, when they encounter you and they start asking you any questions, and very often it's during transport, they try to ask you questions. These vehicles are all hooked up for recordings. So statements that are being made in there are being recorded. They don't have any right to privacy in that situation, which means those statements can be used against you. They're voluntary. You're being asked something, you're answering it voluntarily. They don't have to read you Miranda and all that. That's a misnomer. People watch too much TV. They don't have to do that. So be careful about that. And my advice would be, like in any situation with any law enforcement, is you have the right not to speak, and you should exercise that right. And the third part of this is, if you are taken into immigration detention, you will have an opportunity for a bond hearing. And I'm sure Zen can speak more accurately to that issue, but at a bond hearing, the government will have to present evidence as to why you should be detained, either without the right to post a bond, or the bond being at a dollar figure that is higher than you could possibly reach. And so you have an opportunity to have your lawyer argue as to what's a reasonable bond. And if you can post that bond, you should be able to be out of detention pending the process that has to go forward to actually revoke your status, not your visa, which already got revoked, but your status. So that's the process that takes place. The most important thing, and I can't stress it enough, is that you do not have to talk to ICE. And so there is no reason why you should be doing that. Folks are like, well, if I don't cooperate, it looks bad. The best way you can cooperate with law enforcement is always to do it through counsel. That's my advice.
Okay, great. So, Bob, maybe you could talk us through the bond process a little bit more, because I think folks probably have a lot of questions about that. In one of the worst case scenarios, if they do find themselves in detention.
Well, to me, the biggest problem with the bond process is actually getting into court. Just getting somebody's attention so you can move in there and argue your case. The most important thing you can do is beforehand, and that's to structure it properly. Get the right documents filed, get the right backup information, get the right people behind your cause, make sure they're aware they're going to have to come up with the bond, right? And sometimes you're going to run, at least lately, run into a couple of instances where I've had immigration judges telling me, at least initially, I couldn't bond because of something that had preceded my even coming into the case. And I had to find ways around that. But I think the biggest thing beyond all what I'm saying, I know it's very general, but it kind of works that way, is you just got to be creative. Identify the client, get the backing of the family, the people, the support group, whatever, get that lined up and have that ready to go. Have people ready to show up, and then get hold of the court and push it. I hope I'm not being too general. But it is not. What it is not is throwing a bunch of stuff against the wall and hoping something sticks. You got to be going in knowing who your client is, what their background is, what they've been in, what trouble they've been in. You got to have that ready, and you got to get that out front to make it really clear that you're aware of anything that they might have, so they can't pull it in after you've done your stuff about what you're trying to do. If there's any bad news, bring it up. Don't let them bring it up.
That's great. That's really helpful. And I think we'll go back and talk a little bit more specifically about, if ICE comes knocking, what exactly it is, what kind of steps we can take. But just kind of sort of to backtrack, can we talk a bit about the kinds of grounds that, like, are these just unprecedented times, or is it sort of that there are grounds, constitutional considerations that need to be discussed with respect to these kinds of visa revocations and everything that we're seeing sort of in the immigration community more broadly about, there's a lot of litigation going on. So could you maybe touch on, and whoever's comfortable doing that here, could you maybe touch on some of the constitutional concerns or legal implications? Like what is ICE and the government kind of, and DHS and DOS, what are they actually relying on here?
I'll let Corum and Jay and Bob talk about the constitutional considerations, but I just want to share an observation in the cases that I'm dealing with personally, right? You know, a lot of these people, actually almost all of them, you know, none of them have been really involved in any of the protests you're seeing in the news. And then also there's people who've never been convicted that are getting their CVIS records. So not even the visa revoked, the more severe CVIS records, because remember that controls your stay in the United States. And so I'm not really seeing any rhyme or reason as to who's being affected. I mean, I had a guy at the University of New York the other day. He got arrested for a DUI in like 2016, Indian national too, no Muslim background, wasn't really involved in any of the protest on campus at all, or posted. And all he had was a DUI in 2016, so quite some time ago. That was dismissed, right? So again, no conviction, just arrested and charges dismissed. So in terms of who's being targeted, I haven't really seen a rhyme or reason. I mean, there's some articles online. I haven't really entertained them, but that they're using like Palantir AI and stuff to kind of just sort through lists of students to pick out. I mean, I don't know if anyone else has an opinion on that, but even if you didn't participate in protests and you've never been arrested, it doesn't necessarily mean you're safe.
It's not a constitutional issue, and I don't know if anybody else is running into this or not, but it's been my general observation with what I'm seeing that the things they're enforcing are things they always could enforce. Yeah, if you've got a conviction of some kind, you could always pick somebody up. They're just doing it now. And I'm wondering how much of this is the simple fact that they really can't find anybody. But they boasted about coming up with numbers of people that are here unlawfully, and they wanted to come up with numbers showing how kind of what they're doing in the way of deporting to make to satisfy different criteria of their own. And so now you go for the easy target, somebody who had a shoplifting charge that was dropped 6 years ago or something like that. And they're literally that petty. Have one that came in over the weekend that I'm looking for. One of you guys I'll probably pass to if we can to help, because they're out of where we are. They're over on the East Coast, more Central Florida, the East Coast, and they need help with a lady who's sitting in a hotel room now, apparently it's very nice, while they're holding her there. And in the process, it's because she had a what the family describes, and you're never really sure how accurate the description is, but what the family describes as a hit and run that was in essence authorized in the sense that the person returned, said to the police, this was involved me, I didn't know what happened here, and the police told her not to worry about it and go. It's that specious, but we're talking about things long ago that they're picking them up for now. So I don't know that it's random. I don't think it's random, but I think they're scouring for stuff because they can't just go into neighborhoods and find people.
One of the things to note is that in immigration court, they don't deal with the constitutional issues, right? So the immigration judges, these are not Article 3 judges in that way, like district court judges, federal judges in that sense that you're a judge for life. These are Board of Immigration Appeals judges or immigration judges, which are hired they're essentially administrative judges. So they process the administrative rules. So to enforce your constitutional rights, you're going to have to file in United States District Court. And Florida has 3 districts: Northern District, Middle District, Southern District. So you'd have to file in one of those districts. What are your constitutional rights that you get to have, even as a student visa person or an immigrant who is not a green card holder? You still have due process rights. You have your 5th Amendment rights, due process, equal protection. You can file suit on those grounds. Theoretically, we believe, I still believe, you have your First Amendment rights, which is freedom of speech and association. We're going to see how that plays out with our brother Khalil up in the New Jersey area, but that's definitely something that has, in the past, there's case law about being able to enforce your First Amendment right when you're not a green card or U.S. citizen. You still have your 4th Amendment rights for the most part, which is search and seizure. Other than at a border point of entry, it's a different thing. You don't really have very much, if any, quite frankly, 4th Amendment rights at the border. So if you're traveling in or out of the country, you're going to have searches of your phones, searches of your laptop, Surface, whatever, iPads, all of that's going to happen. There's a split in different jurisdictions right now as to whether or not you are going to be able to be forced to give a password out, a verbal password. It depends on what jurisdiction we're in. But I would highly recommend folks who are traveling, who are not US citizens, and quite frankly, even if you are US citizens, I highly recommend not using biometric as a way to access your devices. Biometrics being a thumbprint or your face, don't use those because there's no Fourth Amendment protection for those. Something you have to verbally say, that is something you can arguably have a Fourth Amendment protection around. And we talked about it a few minutes ago. If law enforcement comes at you, you have the right to remain silent. You still have that. So there are constitutional rights, even if you're a student who's you're an international student who's here on a visa, or if you're otherwise not a US citizen or green card holder, you have these other rights. So it's important for you the only way you get to enforce those rights is if you don't give them up. You don't voluntarily give them up, right? So if you just start talking to the law enforcement, you're giving up that Fifth Amendment right to protect yourself from self-incrimination. If you are going through a border checkpoint and you have, your devices are not protected from being searched, without a warrant, they can just search those things and you've given up that right. So it's just important to understand the things we can do to be proactive and think through how to protect ourselves and those we care about in these types of situation. We're in, as Zayn said, unprecedented times. So you may still get arrested for something, detained for something, and all of that. But the whole idea in the US is that what law enforcement does at the front end, we don't challenge it in that moment. We just go along with them. Where we do is we challenge it later in court. But you have to preserve your rights to be able to challenge them later in court.
Alina, there was just one quick thing I was going to add on this front is, I think on a higher level, it's helpful to think of what's happening today in terms of first kind of the politics of it all, right? So there's a new president coming in that has an agenda and wants to be able to show that he's moving on that agenda, just like Bob said. So one of the things they're looking to is, just putting it simply, numbers. They want numbers on the immigration side that shows that they're moving for the people that voted for them. We also have an issue with a president that wants to dramatically expand the amount of power that a president has. And so we're seeing that with things like the executive orders. We're seeing it further. Prior presidents have done the same, but this president's going even further. And we're seeing it with the exercise of police authority, and even with things like immigration, where they're handling things in a way that's different than we've ever seen in the past. And the other piece on this that I think is relevant is lawyers largely work on the way things have been handled in the past. We rely on precedent. We rely on how things have been handled previously. And we have an administration today that really wants to break down the idea of historical norms. And so I explain that part because I think it's important to understand that for purposes of even the lawyers, people like Bob, Zan, and Perm, who deal with this every day, it's making it more difficult for them to give very concrete advice because we're dealing with an administration that doesn't want to follow the historical norms. And so that's a little bit more macro than the more specific advice that was given, but I think it helps orient us into why we're seeing this, and even the lawyers are a little bit unable to give concrete responses.
Okay. This actually kind of ties into some of the comments that we're getting in our chat, Mr. Seidman in particular. Jay, could you speak a little bit more about sort of that cooperation between federal and state resources, like that state resources are being used to advance federal purposes, which historically speaking, that was kind of a bifurcated system. So could you talk a little bit more about that, particularly in the civil rights context?
Sure. So there always seemed to be kind of a division between the federal government and their immigration services and then the state. So if we think of your typical crimes that you hear of, the vast majority of the ones that you hear of here, for example, in Florida, are Florida state crimes. There are certainly federal crimes that are with the United States government, but that's a minority of the crimes that you hear about day to day. And so historically, there seemed to be a clear division between immigration services and the state. So I was an assistant state attorney. I was in a different county. I was in the good old Polk County in Central Florida. And even there wasn't direct cooperation between the state and immigration services. So if you had somebody, regardless of what their immigration status was, it wasn't for the state to start communicating, hey, we have somebody that we think doesn't have immigration status here. The only thing that I remember them doing when I was a prosecutor is that there was a certain number of days that they would hold somebody in jail before releasing them, giving ICE the opportunity to come in, but they weren't coordinating with the state. Right now, we're seeing it, and it's happening at the federal level, right? The federal government is insisting on more cooperation from the states and local governments and providing them more information. But you're also seeing a political push in states where they want to cooperate more with immigration and they want more people being detained. So there's a new law that was passed here in the state of Florida that Khurram, I know, can speak to very specifically, that expands the cooperation with the state, but by the state, to give more information to the immigration services. And with that, Khurram, I'll turn it over to you because I know you watch these things very closely.
Yeah, thanks. No, you're right on. It's a program. It's a federal program. It's there's a code called 287G. So that's the statute actually. So the 287G, it's been around for a very long time. Essentially, it is what are the responsibilities of a state law enforcement agency when it's asked to cooperate with the federal agency, and specifically in the immigration space, right? That's what that 287 is about. So there was at one point, it was very broad. The cooperation could be everything, like including go pick up a guy at their house by local police. It changed like about 15 years ago or something. It narrowed quite a bit. What Jay's talking about is, what did it narrow to? It narrowed to, generally speaking, it's 2 days, it's 48 hours. So if I'm arrested for like, petty theft, and I'm out of status, and I get flagged in the Department of Corrections when I get arrested and booked into the jail, there's an immigration hold placed on me. And they have 2 days. Basically ICE has 2 days to come pick me up, or the local jail will just let me out because they don't want to keep me forever. So DeSantis back in January put forth a revision to that, saying that the Florida local police has to cooperate much more broadly, like it was in the old days, over 15 years ago, where you could have a team of folks in your local law enforcement that was sort of deputized by the ICE folks to go help pick up people, and they would go out with ICE together and do that. Now that didn't go through, but even without the statute change, the governor said we're going to go ahead and have FDLE implement that. So we are seeing a version of that being implemented. So it's broader than the existing law. So there's a potential challenge that may be coming there. And in fact, there's a number of challenges happening right now. There was one filed recently by the ACLU of Florida in the Southern District of Florida, where essentially the idea that the state of Florida could pick you up and deport you without the feds involved. And that was a supremacy clause violation, according to the pleadings filed by the ACLU, and a Southern District of Florida judge, Kathy Williams, agreed that it looks like it's a violation of the supremacy clause and went ahead and prevented that from being implemented at this point in time. So these fights are ongoing. I think that we have to, and I think Zane and Jay have both said it really well, which is, we're in unprecedented times. So it's very tough to figure out, just because the law says something doesn't mean law enforcement's going to abide by it. I don't know how else to say it. They're kind of wild westing this thing right now. So we just have to be really diligent and make sure we are protecting ourselves and those who we care about, making sure that, as Bob said, that those folks have a network around them so that they can protect themselves. I'm looking in the chat and I see there's a lot of questions about this issue with FIU police, that sort of thing. So it's the same thing I'm talking about, which is under 287G, FIU police can do a certain amount of cooperating with ICE. But they shouldn't really be allowed to do, I think, what I'm reading in the chats, which is to actually go out and pick up people themselves. So they are going to be able to, if ICE picks you up on campus, there's a cooperation with their local police just to make sure it's done in an orderly way. But they really shouldn't be on their own going out and picking up people without ICE there.
Karum makes so many valid points here. I mean, they pop out all over the place. And I guess one of the things that occurs in my sector is it would be great if I could get a hearing where there is real concern that people are just getting yanked, dropped in detention, and we can't get hearings for them. Can't even make contact with them. That's a serious concern. We're trying to prevent this before the fact, but where we have people in these after the fact situations, right? You couple that with, well, not, it's really not coupled, but if you take the FIU situation as an example, I think it's terribly important for people to understand there's a difference between your visa being canceled, right? And your right to stay here in the US, continue your education until it's done for duration of status. It's a very big difference. If you leave the US, you're not going to get back in, but you don't have to go. That doesn't mean somebody is going to try and pick you up because we don't know what these cowboys are doing.
Unprecedented times for sure. Yeah. So we do have a lot of questions that are popping up in the chat, and I'm going to try to address as many of them as possible. A lot of them deal with travel, completely understandably, given the times that we're in. But I did just kind of want to we've talked about it sporadically throughout our conversation, but I just wanted to sort of offer some tangible steps that folks can take if they are approached by ICE, whether it's maybe someone can talk about the kinds of situations in which you can encounter ICE, whether it's at your home, in public, in on-campus housing for students, at your workplace. Can you offer, any of you, can you offer some advice and perhaps a list that we can compile for folks to know what their rights are in situations where they are approached by ICE?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about, essentially there's two types of warrants that ICE relies on. There's the administrative warrant, which is not signed by a judge and it's signed by an ICE officer. And I like to call it the fake warrant. That doesn't really give them access to search your property. They probably can arrest you in a public space if they, approach you at a Walmart parking lot or in the parking lot of, any space accessible by the public. Now, the more concerning warrant is the judicial warrant, right? And that's signed by a federal judge, and that does grant them access to search, within the scope of the warrant. And with employers, because, I do a lot of employment-based immigration, that's generally what we'll see for the large-scale ICE raids. Like if we have a meatpacking plant and ICE shows up, they'll show a judicial warrant. For individuals, unless you're a violent criminal, I haven't really seen those yet, right? And so ICE is relying upon these administrative warrants. And so if you're at home, and the considerations might be different for on-campus housing. I'll let Quorum or Jay talk on that. But if you're in your home off campus and ICE knocks, what I would recommend is ask them to show the warrant first and take a look at the warrant. If you Google administrative warrant versus judicial warrant, you can find pictures on Google Images and examples, and see if it's an actual warrant. If it's not an administrative warrant, you don't have to grant them access to your home. Don't open the door. Have them hold it up to the peephole, or if you have a Ring camera, to the camera, or slide it under the door. But you're not obliged to simply open your door and let ICE agents in. And I would highly recommend you exercise that right if they do use administrative warrant as opposed to a judicial warrant.
One of the things with the warrants on campus is that with that 287G thing I was talking about, there's two models. One of the models is the jail model, which I talked about, which they can hold you for a couple of days, right? The other model, which I didn't mention, I forgot to, which is, I'm glad you brought that up, Sam, which is the warrant model, which is they can help execute the warrants. So if you're on campus and campus housing and local campus police come knock on your door and they're there to execute a ICE warrant, they could be lawfully in that position. But here's what it really comes down to, though, is that whether it's in your house or on the street or wherever it is, your job is not to like fight it in that moment. That's not your role. You know, there's going to be a time for that to happen. You preserve your rights until then, right? You don't give up any statements. You don't voluntarily turn over, you know, empty your pockets and whatever, let them search you, whatever. You don't need to be your own worst enemy there. Your time to fight it will come later. So the key thing is to understand that when it does happen, is don't get yourself another charge. Don't get hit with a resisting arrest, because it's such a little thing. You know, I remember in the old days when I used to do those cases, you know, people would be getting handcuffed and they just do this with their hands, and that's enough for a resisting under the law. It's terrible. So just totally relax, go along with it. It's all going to work out later on. You should, and Bob made a good point of it, just make sure you have that network in place. Folks know where you are. You know, I remember post 9/11, I know I'm dating myself, but I remember post 9/11, we all wished, oh, if only all of these clients had some sort of trackers on them so we would know when they got picked up. Well, you know, technology has come a long way in 25 years. So now you do have that ability. So maybe that's something you should be considering, is turning on your location, making sure that folks know someone's, you know, on top of that for you. You know, think, you know, I'm not the Gen Z millennial in this call, so I'm sure Zane can give you better ideas on that, and so can Jay. But I think there's a lot of technology that you can use at this time to help make sure people know where you are. And then finally, I want to make sure people understand this, is that when law enforcement is going to come at you, in the old days, it was different. They had ICE like written right on them and things like that. That's not what we're seeing now. We're seeing folks that look like they could be there to kidnap you, right? Like they're wearing masks and stuff. So it's really scary, and you don't know who they are. So you need to make sure that you don't end up going with the wrong people that are not law enforcement. So you can ask for identification. And I highly recommend that that's the first thing you do, is I need to see some identification. And, you know, and I also recommend that, you know, if you feel you are in this situation and you're at threat for something, and perhaps maybe you have some minor prior crime in your background, you should have a buddy system when you're walking around campuses and stuff. Like you should have somebody with you who's got a phone and can video record what goes down, because recording the arrest is critically important this day and time. These guys are not wearing body-worn cameras. So the only way there's a record of what really went down is somebody on the outside recording it. So just wanted to throw that out.
I would just add, I agree with everything, of course. Just a couple of quick, simple points of advice is, if you're able to have an attorney that is available to you, if that's a resource that's available to you, it's good to have somebody that you're able to call. The other advice I'd have, which really kind of goes to what Zan and Khurram have said, is there seems to be two different courses of action. One, if you're behind a closed door, then, well, like Zan suggested, ask for the warrant, review the warrant. If you have somebody you can call to ask about it, that's a time to ask. And if you're not behind a closed door, looking at the video of Mahmoud Khalil would be a very helpful way to look at how to respond when law enforcement is there. You can ask questions, but make sure you do it politely. Don't cause a fight there. Just the idea of resisting by itself can create a charge. So I would just use that as an example. If you Google what happened when Mahmoud Khalil got arrested, you can see how an expert would handle that situation. That's, I mean, assuming a lawyer isn't present.
Bob, is there anything that you wanted to add? Thank you, everyone.
Not so much directly on that, because I'm seeing a lot of questions coming up about travel and things like that. But I really like what I'm hearing. I mean, I'm picking up things here myself. I've got some new allies I can call now. So I'm really, really appreciating that. It's so important to have that network. It just is. You have to be on guard now. People have to know where you're going. You have to be able to contact somebody if you're caught in a pinch. Got to be able to do it. Again, coming back to something I said earlier, I'm really concerned about the situations where people are just dragged in. You end up in a detention facility and nobody knows where you are. We can't even get you in front of anybody because you're in there, and they're not going to budge. When they're going to take you out to El Salvador and hang you out there and not bring you back when a federal judge says they're supposed to, and they're supposed to give you some and provide information in the meantime, and they're not complying with that. You really think they're going to let us into stuff, no matter what the rules are? We've got practical things to deal with. I'm seeing one note here on the question, so that kind of ties into that. And this is somebody saying, can you talk about this policy, USCS.gov/alien registration? There are a lot of canards out there about things. Remember, if you are a quote unquote alien, meaning you're not a US citizen, you're here in some other capacity, and you are in any kind of status, whether it's as a student, whether it's as an applicant for something, right? You're already registered. They already know where you are. That's all in place. So if you have any questions beyond that, that's when you call us, right? You call the people on these screens. You ask them these questions. You get advice. You don't try to figure this out on your own. I see questions here about travel and things like that, and I think we all know. I've been telling my green card clients, depending on where they're going and what country they're coming from to get their green card, don't travel, right? I had somebody who is a Canadian who is becoming a U.S. citizen and they got a green card. I told them they were okay to travel. I had somebody from Pakistan, and if you have not been reading about this, then you're not paying attention. And they want to go take people along who are green cards because this is an opportunity of a lifetime. And I'm telling them, good luck getting back in. I'm worried about you if you go. That's a real concern. And if you do, here's some things I want you to do in the process. I want stuff from you so I can verify different things and hopefully step in if you're given a hard time coming back. I know we'll take a moment to talk about that in a second, but these are things that are so practical and ordinary that if you have this combination of knowing who to contact us and following the general things you learn here, putting them into play in the meantime, you got a pretty good chance of getting through this thing. But this is crazy. We're not in normal times. So if you are asking us questions about what's going to happen in the future, good luck with that because we don't know.
Great. So I'm going to touch on the sort of travel questions that a lot of folks have, but just with respect to kind of wrap up the conversation that we're having right now, we have a couple of questions about the kind of support that roommates, for instance, who are U.S. citizens can offer if they're living with an international student and ICE does come knocking at your door. Are there any suggestions that you have for a situation like that? And then there are two other questions on this topic that I'll address, and then we can kind of wrap up this conversation and get on to the bulk of the questions, which are about travel. So
I think what I was saying earlier, the roommate would be great, right? We're talking about making sure you have somebody who knows where you are. I mean, maybe tracking your phone, your location, being with you and can video record if law enforcement does come up on you. All of that is what I think, would be great assistance if someone's willing to do that.
that's great. And Khurram, actually, this is a question that's directly tied to something you said earlier on in the webinar. They're asking specifically about self-deportation. Should that be the last option to consider? And I recognize that this is a case-by-case basis, but I just wanted to get your take on that.
Sure. So again, not giving specific legal advice to any person, just generally speaking, if a person doesn't have some criminal record or something like that that is going to be a grounds to remove their status later, then self-deporting just means you're not even going to go through a process of trying to stay here. So there is no reason to self-deport at the moment because all they're doing is saying, we're going to take away your travel rights. Well, all that means is you're not going to travel. Until they come and want to take away your actual status, you're fine to still be here. You might not be able to travel, but you're fine to continue to be here. So generally speaking, not in any one case or another, if you don't have a criminal record, I would definitely consider self-deportation as the very last resort.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. The other question that we had related to this is say, I mean, this one specifically, the question specifically references a church, but say it's a public venue, and the door is closed, someone, and ICE comes in, what to do in that kind of a situation? If the door is unlocked, can they just walk in? Is that considered a private space or a public space? How exactly does that work? And can you just talk about the dynamics of that?
So there just recently was a ruling that that an immigration judge made about that, which again, they really shouldn't be opining on this because they don't do con law, but said, oh, that it was okay for them to have gone into a religious institute to go ahead and detain the person that was before them at that moment. So I think the answer is the same as a lot of this stuff, which is that you can, a private institution can say, look, I'm not authorizing you to come in unless you have a warrant to search this premises. And I think you stand on that. If they come in anyways, then that's something that will get challenged later. But if you consent to the entry, then there's nothing to challenge. So preserve your rights. I'm going to say it 100 times today. Preserve your rights, which means that if they come to your house, your school, there was a school, I don't remember where, I think it was might have been in Chicago, where they said, no, ICE can't come in. They wanted to come in and go look for somebody, and the public school said, no, you can't come in. So they didn't go in. So I do think that it's important that we have allies in this, and we find those allies and we try and hope that they can stand up for all of our rights as Americans, who, in the broader sense, standing up for the ideal of America here, and that they will say, no, I'm not going to consent to letting ICE walk in to my private facility or whatever my space is. And then if they come in anyways, we challenge it on the back end.
That's great, thank you. So I am gonna, unless there are any other questions with regards to this particular topic, I just did want to pivot to travel because there's a flood of questions related to travel. So I think what most folks are concerned about is whether it's safe to travel for legal permanent residents, green card holders. Some folks are about US citizens as well, and then the kinds of interactions that we're seeing with CBP at the borders. If someone can speak to that in terms of what we're seeing, but then also in terms, Bob, I know that we do have a strategy in place, but the kinds of strategies that we're encouraging folks to follow in advance of their interactions with CBP, if they are coming in as, say, green card holders.
My approach to travel really, sorry, Bob, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, please.
Yeah, my approach to travel really depends, right? Generally, everyone in America is going to fall into one of 4 buckets. If you're undocumented, that's the first bucket. Obviously, don't travel because you're never going to get back in. Number 2, if you're a non-immigrant visa holder, which is like an F1 visa holder, an H1B visa holder, I strongly caution against travel. I mean, I know everyone said a million times on this call we're in unprecedented situations, and so my approach has been pretty conservative, probably to the annoyance of our clients. But I'm like, do not, just stay in the United States while we sort this out, at least until the federal courts sort some of this mess out. If you're a green card holder, it depends on where you're from, right? And we have this impending Trump travel ban. The list was leaked to the New York Times. I'm sure some of you saw it. Pakistan was on that list. Iran was on that list. Somehow Iraq and Lebanon didn't get on that list, But if you are a green card holder from one of those countries, I would highly recommend that you do not travel, because we don't know the language of the ban yet. It hasn't come out, and we don't know the scope of the ban yet. And even if it is illegal or unconstitutional for them not to allow green card holders in, it's going to take some time between the implementation of that ban and for the courts to sort it out. So you might be one of the unlucky people that are turned away at the border and you're stuck outside the United States. If you're a green card holder from, Canada, the UK, generally that's okay. Again, some of this is individualized advice. So if you've traveled to a country for whatever reason, visiting family in a country on that list and you're a green card holder, I would also caution against travel unless completely unnecessary. So if you're a Canadian citizen and you're visiting family in Pakistan, my advice is still, stay put in the United States for the time being. Just because it subjects you to potentially the higher chance of secondary screening. And then if you're a US citizen, no issues with travel as of right now. I don't know if that aligns with your advice, Bob.
It does, and it's excellent. Wow, I really like that. There are some other practical sides to this. You know, there are little things we do, right? I tell my clients I want to have particularly green card holders. If you're going, I don't think you should, but if you do, remember, you can't stay away for more than 6 months. Somebody here had a question about their mom traveling and ordinarily being gone for 9 months at a time. If you're a green card holder, you're going to lose it just by doing that, particularly now. You are not gone for more than 6 months, and you shouldn't even be pushing that if you go at all. So these are little practical things. I want a copy of that stuff before you go. I want it where I can get my hands on it for when you get back. I want you to come back with a cold phone and a cold computer if you got all those things around with you. If you really need them for some other things, heck, FedEx them or mail them or DHS them back to the US. Don't carry them on the plane. Yeah, you're going to be stuck having to watch the movie instead, but that's okay. Might be a lot better than them not even letting you get back in. So all these practical little things where you don't want to get in your own way. So phones that are going to be they're going to look at should be cold, so there's nothing to look at. They shouldn't be able to look at any kind of other electronic device because you shouldn't have it with you. You've got to watch where this. And again, if you're a U.S. citizen, hey, bring it. It's not a problem. They got to let you in. I can't even remember how old the precedent is. It's over 100 years old. That if you are a U.S. citizen, they have to let you back in even without your passport. There can be a civil fine for that, but that's all. I mean, it's just the oldest thing there is. I can't imagine that going away. But let's remember one other thing here, and that is these people are acting very independently at the border. Even if we have court decisions in place, they're doing a lot of times what they want to anyway. They're trying to get, in many situations, I've already gotten calls on this, people to sign a form at the border giving up their green card. If you've got your green card, stay here. Don't travel now. We'll wait till this thing settles out, right?
And piggybacking off Bob, just because I forgot to make this point. One thing I'm seeing is going back to, for example, staying outside the United States the majority of the year, right? Things that they didn't want to make a big deal of before, but they could, they're starting to make a big deal of it. I just had a Canadian green card holder. She's married to a U.S. citizen child. She travels to and from South Florida and Toronto all the time. Coming back from Toronto, she usually has a copy. She has an expired green card, but a valid 751 receipt. That's the removal of conditions on a family-based green card, and that's on a marriage-based green card, and that's okay. As long as you have the receipt, it's fine. Technically, it should be the original copy of the receipt, not a copy of the original. And she usually travels with a copy, and they decided to make it a big deal and not grant her entry to the United States. Her husband was able to locate the original, and he flew up to Canada, delivered it, came back with her, and they were fine. But again, they lost 2 days,
Wow.
They lost money, super inconvenient. Wow. Never seen that as an issue, especially on the Canadian border. They're pretty, chill with that. But they decided to make an issue of it, and they have grounds to. So again, don't give them a reason to give you a hard time. And just what I'm seeing in practice is, I haven't seen too much changes with USCIS yet, and even Department of State outside of the visa revocations, but in day-to-day adjudications. In our practice, we do like dozens of cases a week. I'm not seeing changes there yet. Really, where I'm seeing the biggest changes is CBP and ICE, obviously. But with what I deal with, CBP is almost like a rogue agency right now. And especially in certain areas like CBP on the northern border, I'm having a very difficult time with. So just keep that in mind.
Well, that's good stuff.
One of the questions we had was kind of with respect to the interactions with CBPs, and you just alluded to it in that they are sort of operating as a rogue agency at the moment. But what kind of questions are being asked of even legal permanent residents and U.S. citizens? Like some of the questions that we're seeing in the chat are they asking about political views and specifically and most pertinently at the moment with respect to Gaza? Like, are they asking questions about people's stance on that? And if they do ask about that, how should one respond?
I think the length that you should go to answer questions depends on what your status is. So remember, if you're a non-immigrant visa holder, right, you do have my advice generally if you're a citizen, right, is don't answer non-basic questions because they they have to let you in, right? So, you know, what was the purpose? How long was your trip? 10 days. Okay, that's fine, right? But, you know, anything deeper, you know, again, you know, exercise your right to remain silent. With a green card holder, generally the same thing, unless you have, you know, some what I'd call red flags, you know, and again, that's going to be individualized. As a non-immigrant visa holder, you know, you have to kind of walk that balance between exercising your right to remain silent and understanding that CBP has great discretion to just not allow you in, even with a valid visa, right? I mean, a visa doesn't grant you a right to access to the United States. And so, you know, in terms of just the questions, again, you know, it's a judgment call in terms of how you answer them, right? So and what your status is. So if you're a non-immigrant visa holder, if you're an F1 visa holder, it's probably, if you want to get into the country, in your interest to answer the questions, but you know, do so cautiously. Don't give out more information than what they're needing. And if you know, my rule of thumb is if you have a doubt as to whether you should say it, don't say it.
I'm flabbergasted that we even have to address these questions. I hope we're all looking at ourselves wondering what the heck is going on, that we have to tell a green card holder to be careful about traveling abroad and coming back. Just that basic thing. That we're having to tell a student who is just going to class that somebody might be canceling their visa and explain that doesn't mean they have to leave. They can stay and study, right? And we might even be able to address that somehow. We're all lawyers here, and I hope the people watching this, because this question has kind of been thrown out there generally, know, yes, we are available, not just CAIR Florida, which is a nonprofit. We're all available. You can call us. You can reach out to us, and we will try to help or get you in the hands of somebody who can. At CAIR, we're more inclined to try and get you in the hands of somebody where they can help you, because we mostly do asylum these days. But we will step into things. And this network we're developing, even with this gathering tonight, is going to help you out there who are not lawyers watching this. But somebody asked a question about traveling around the U.S. I would never have to caution you about traveling around the U.S. Once you're in, you should be able to go anywhere you want, and there shouldn't be a problem at all. But I do think you want to be a little careful. I do think you want to be careful where you're going, and don't go alone, and know your network, and make sure people on the ground know where you are and and making sure you can reach out to them. You're still gonna have to watch your back a little bit. And I wouldn't have had to tell you that 6 months ago. So we're in a different time. Understand that as you have any question about what we're doing right now.
Yeah, the only caveat on domestic travel is I'm seeing reports, none from my clients personally, but I'm seeing reports of ICE at Puerto Rican airports, and you know, there's some interesting rules there because of the whole 100 miles from the border thing, and you know, Puerto Rico being, you know, kind of out there, you kind of have to fly into San Juan to get there. So, anyways, just you know, don't go to Puerto Rico if you're going to do domestic travel, or any of the island territories, Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands. I think that's all of them, but American Samoa, I think too. Yeah.
There's a question that popped in here about people. Let's see, people with political asylum needing to be cautious. That idea. If you are an asylum applicant, I'm hearing cases. Fortunately, I haven't had one yet myself, where people who have receipts for asylum applications who are waiting to be adjudicated in that regard, either with an interview or an immigration court, are being yanked. I don't know how accurate that is, but I do know that the AILA has put out a cautionary note over the last weekend saying that the USCIS has said that for asylees, meaning people who have been granted asylum and and in this instance, people who have been granted asylum and who have waited 1 year, which is what you have to wait after you've been granted asylum before applying for their green card, who are now applying for that green card, are being told, or they're not really being told, but the USCIS is on hold in that regard. They are going to be sitting on your green card applications as asylees, theoretically, while they review some different things that they're very nebulous about. So we're in another very strange world. The history is you get asylum, you wait a year, you apply for a green card, and you get it right away. Why? You're an asylee, a person who fled a situation, and you are now in the safety of the United States. I can't give you that guarantee right now.
Thank you. I think we're coming close to the hour, or at the hour mark, but there was one question that I did want to address. we've been talking a lot about US citizens and legal permanent residents returning from abroad and what they can expect at the border, but what about folks that are on non-immigrant visas? Say, for instance, their visa is canceled at the US border, what kind of steps they should be taking, and generally what the process is in that kind of a situation.
Yeah, generally, if they revoke or cancel your visa at the border, they're going to send you on a flight back home. So, best course of action is, you shouldn't try to tackle this alone, really. I'm not just trying to sell my lawyer services, but contact a lawyer. We'll do a FOIA request. We'll see what else we could get and see the reasons why, as to why it was revoked. We'll also, one of the best things you can do, and I think people don't always do this, is the second you're in a place to do so, record the conversation you just had with CBP officers, right? Because that conversation is fresh in your head, and so we can kind of, if we've done this long enough, you can kind of see through the line of questioning where they're going or where they're coming from, and that helps us resolve the problem because we can reapply for the visa, right? And that just helps us, overcome any deficiencies that they might have seen. And both the horrible and beautiful thing about immigration law is you can have two identical cases with two different outcomes, and that goes for with the same person, right? You can get your visa revoked, you apply for the same visa and have a different outcome. Maybe that's less likely now with the current administration, but yeah. And then also don't sign anything. That's I have seen CBP make up statements and have people sign a statement. I had a girl coming back from Nassau. Nassau has pre-clearance like Canada, so you do CBP on that side, right? Instead of coming back to the United States, you get cleared in Nassau, Bahamas. And she was dating a hedge fund manager, pretty well educated Colombian Canadian dual citizen. They essentially put her in detention for 5 or 6 hours in Nassau. She had extreme anxiety, and she essentially just signed something to get out of the situation. And that statement had pretty blatantly false things on it. And our job is just harder if you sign something saying you said something as opposed to not signing anything and just taking the short-term pain for some long-term gain, as I'd say.
There's a question in here too, by the way, about green card holders, whether they should be carrying them everywhere in the U.S. You always were supposed to. You're always supposed to have your green card on you. Please understand that. I guess when you go swimming, you probably don't want to take it with you. But other than that, and in the shower, yes, you have to have your green card with you. So please give yourself a break in that.
And U.S. citizens should carry a picture of their passport just for, in case you don't want to accidentally be detained, right? I mean, it's not implausible with the current administration that, if you look like me, they might come up to you and think, you're here illegally or they want to detain you. And so I keep a copy of my passport on my phone anyways, because I can't remember my son's birthdays, but it's come in handy with the current administration. I recommend everyone do that if you're a U.S. citizen.
I was going to ask Zane or Bob if you guys have any thoughts about social media, because I know that there's a lot of folks.
Yeah, cleanse it before you fly, because you have no, expectation of privacy at the border. They will go through your phone if they want to, and even if you refuse to give your password, they can take your phone away for a couple of weeks, scan the contents. I've heard, the technology that does so, it's kind of mixed results. So they'll sometimes give your phone back without scanning it if they can't get through it, and you have some kind of app or protection on your phone. I'm not sure what that is. I'm not a tech guy, but that does exist. But yeah, I mean, if you have anything questionable, and when I say questionable, anything the government would view not favorably, it's probably best to cleanse your social media. I gave this presentation at our local masjid, and a lot of uncles were just big on the idea of flying with burner phones. I guess that's fine, especially if you're a U.S. citizen. I mean, what are they going to do? They can't deny you entry to the United States, and they can't access your real phone at home unless they have a warrant, right? So flying with a burner phone is fine if you're okay with not flying with your primary phone. But yeah, no, definitely be careful with that. And then also, if you're a student, I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, I don't know, Harm, if you disagree with me. You do have a right to free speech, but maybe now is not the time to exercise it and to be cautious. If you're a green card holder or citizen, go ahead, please exercise your rights. But if you are on a student visa, you're in a much more precarious position. There's just a much more discretion in the government ability to, deny you entry or revoke your visa. And so you need to, the calculus has changed over the last couple of months. And so take that into account.
In those same regards, I'd have this with clients who are citizens, but I'm getting my green card holders to do this now too, and other people, depending on how they fit into our network. there are always the magic wordies because you've made the contact, you've laid your plans, you've got your contacts set out, and got people to back you up. Where if you are not really comfortable with what's being asked you at the border, you pick up your phone if they haven't taken it, and you say, "You don't mind if I call my lawyer, do you?" Right? That does seem to work. That's and then they call us. Or if they've yanked your phone and there's anybody nearby, particularly a U.S. citizen, because I've had this where somebody was a green card and the other person was a U.S. citizen, same family, and they were kind of coming over to get them, even though they was technically zoned out. The way they were working at the airport, the phone had been taken from the green card holder, and the U.S. citizen relative said, "You don't mind if I call his lawyer, do you? I'm going to get him on the phone for you." And everything got dropped. Now, this is some time back, okay? This isn't today. It might not fly too well right now, but having us in your speed dial isn't going to hurt. And letting them know you can call us, I don't think is going to hurt you either.
All right, great. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we aren't able to answer everyone's questions in the chat. I know that this is we've used the word unprecedented, but it's a volatile time, and I recognize that people have a lot of questions generally and specific to their own cases. We encourage you to reach out, truly. Like Bob said, if we can't answer your question ourselves, we do have a network of folks, all of us, who can connect you with someone that can. But Zan, Khurram, Jay, thank you so much for your time. And if anyone has any questions, the recording and I believe our contact information, Naha will be sharing that. So if there's anything we can help with, we're happy to be here and put in the extra hours to learn ourselves and work with you guys. So, but yeah, with that, I just want to wish everyone a very good evening, and hopefully we'll reconvene again with a few more answers and in a better space. So thank you so much, everyone. Assalamu alaikum.